This is Mag212 and this is my modification tutorial on the Nerf Modulus ECS-10. I'll put up a table of contents just so you could see what modifications I'm going to be doing, and if you would like to go to a certain modification and skip over some other ones, I will put a time in the video and you can just go to that time and look at that modification segment. But first off, I'm going to start by modifying the stock. The stock for the Modulus is super bad because these little pieces of plastic are not rigid and they like to bend. So whenever you apply force, your blaster will wiggle and you can't stabilize it. To start, you're going to want to take your Modulus stock and unscrew all 5 screws right here. Once you've done that, you can lift the top half off and you want to take out the part with the orange pieces. And now you're going to cut off this orange piece where I've marked it off with Sharpie. You can also go ahead and cut off these little stubs at the end because your screw is going to be holding it in and you don't really need these pieces. These are the CPVC stubs that I've cut out. They're actually a little greater than 2 1/8 inches. They're more like 2 3/16, but that's about how big you want them. And then I just sanded them down to about that size. Now you can slide your CPVC onto the stock part and then you can put it back together. If they don't quite fit, you can go sand them down, and if they're too short, you're going to have to start by cutting a new one and making this one longer. It's important to give yourself more material so you can sand down because it's pretty difficult to add length on. If your screw posts line up in here, that means that you're ready to go, and you can take your other half of the stock and put it back on. It's okay if your shell is bowing a little bit here and you can't shut it. You can just fix that by screwing your screws in, and it should pull the two halves together. Once you've screwed in all of these screws and everything's fully reassembled, you should be left with a very sturdy stock. It no longer wiggles whatsoever, and it should be a very nice attachment for the Modulus now. And I think it looks pretty nice too. Also, a very quick thanks to blastaway.eu for this idea. So now we're going to begin to internally modify the Modulus to improve the performance. You're going to want to take off all of the attachments before you do anything else. Before you can take the Modulus apart, you're going to need to unscrew the battery tray by taking out that screw and taking that off. And you're also going to want to unscrew the 2 screws in the stock adapter and pull that piece off. To access the internals of the blaster, you're going to need to take your Phillips head screwdriver and unscrew all of the visible screws in the shell. None of them are particularly hard to find, but there are 2 underneath the battery foregrip and 1 underneath the stock adapter right there. If you're afraid to lose track of where all the screws go and in what posts, you can just leave them and take off the top half of the Modulus, and you can leave all of the screws in the shell and just set it aside. This is what the inside of the Modulus looks like when you first open it. I'm just going to pan through the internals so you can see where all the parts go. And this top carry handle rail goes onto here. It likes to fall off, so I'm just going to keep it off for the modifications. I'm going to start by taking out some of the non-essential pieces just to clear up the way so you can more easily reach different parts. The barrel will come out in one big piece like this. I'm not going to take the little rail attachment nubs out because they're actually nested in there pretty securely and they're not going to fall out. Now I'm going to start to remove certain pieces. I'm going to unscrew this screw. Once you have unscrewed that screw, you can lift this piece off and put that to the side. I'm also going to unscrew this plate right here. It has 2 Phillips head screws. You can just take that part out, and that will allow you to access a mechanical and electronic lock. I'm also going to unscrew this screw right here so I can remove the trigger so it's out of the way. This part may fall off. It's important to the whole system, but that's how it goes, so it's not very hard to keep track of it. Now I'm going to begin to rewire the entire gun. In order to do that, we're going to need to remove all of the parts so we can access the wiring. Unscrew this screw right here, and you will be able to lift off this orange cover. You also need to unscrew the 2 screws here to take off this orange bit. Once the screws are out, you can just lift up that part. And now we are going to unscrew the flywheel cage so that we can access all of the wires and the resistors on the motor. Once you have undone the 4 screws, you can lift out the motors, and you can also lift out the battery tray. We are going to be completely rewiring this gun from scratch, so you can take this switch right here and pull it out. Before you can pull out all the wires, you need to unscrew the screw on this green plate. The circuit board will then come off if you pull the wires out. And now you can pull out this electronic lock, and the rev switch will come out too. Putting our now empty shell aside, we are going to be working on the motor housing. This mess of wires is actually more complicated than it needs to be because they have enacted these locks, which restrict certain functions if you are not doing the correct thing. I'm going to be cutting a lot of wires, so pay careful attention. Looking at the battery pack, there is a little green circuit board underneath, which is not necessary at all. You can unscrew the screw, or you can just rip the plate off and clip the wire off. Also, clipping off the black wire going to the battery tray. Your battery tray is now free, and we're going to set that to the side. You can clip all of the wires off the motor because you won't be needing them. And now your motor is free, so you can also set that aside. And there is really only one of these switches that you need to keep. You need to keep one for the rev switch. They're all identical, so you can choose any which one you want and cut that off. You need to keep this piece. However, the rest of these pieces are unnecessary. All of these wires are just creating resistance, so you can throw these out, and we are going to completely rewire the gun. Now looking at our flywheel cage, there's a green circuit board with 4 resistors. We are going to be removing this board entirely and rewiring the motors because that will lead to increased performance. If you look closely, you can see that I am clipping the board off of the motors. You don't want to cut off the prongs because then you won't have anything to solder to, but you just want to make sure that nothing is attached to the board when you rip it off. Now you can take your wire cutters or needle nose pliers, get it wedged underneath the board, and pull the board off. As you can see, I've removed the board and its resistors, and I'm now left with the motors. Every motor has 2 silver prongs. Those are essential for the function of the motors, so that's why you have to be careful when you are ripping off that circuit board. And while I'm at it, I'm going to be taking off this rubber skirt because I believe it contributes to jams. Now we are going to be rewiring the motors. You will need red and black wire, and you will also need a soldering iron and solder. As you can see, I have cut out a piece of wire with an exposed wire in the center and on the ends. Now that we have 2 wires, you're going to be soldering them parallel to each other. The red one is to signify positive, although it's no different than the black one. And we're going to have that in the front, and the black wire is going to be in the back. This is how I've soldered the motors. So once again, positive wire in the front, which is parallel to the negative wire, which is going from the back prong to the back prong. Now we're going to be soldering our motor to our rev switch and to our battery pack. First, laying your motor in, you're going to want to do that, and you're going to want to measure how much black wire you need to solder it to the negative terminal on the battery tray. Your negative terminal will be the one on the bottom right because this is where the negative of your battery meets the terminal. As you can see, I have soldered a black wire to my negative terminal on the motors, and I'm having it go toward the front because when I put it into the shell, I'm going to measure exactly how much black wire I need to reach the negative terminal. That's what your wire should look like going to the negative battery terminal. Now we are going to take a red wire and solder it to the positive wire on the motors, and we're going to have that go all the way back to our rev switch down in the handle. Now we have a positive wire soldered to our positive wire on our motors. I'm running it through the original channel which the wires were in. Now that we have reached where our rev switch is, we're going to cut the wire where we think we have enough, and then strip the end of the wire so we can solder it to the switch. That's what the wire looks like, soldered to the middle prong on the switch. My second wire has been soldered to the bottom prong of the switch. It doesn't really matter which is which, but it needs to be the bottom two so that when the switch is depressed, the motors will start. I ran that wire along the same path as the other one, except it came out the front, and I soldered it to the positive terminal on the battery tray. This block right here is necessary in order to rev your motors because it is what pushes down on the switch. Just to test to make sure everything's working, make sure you have some batteries in the battery pack and then push your switch down. And if both of your flywheels are spinning, that means that you've done everything correctly and you are now done with the modification. Now that we are finished with the modifications, I'm going to start to reassemble. And now you are officially finished. That is all the pieces back in, and I'll go over them really quickly just so you can see how to reassemble your gun. Once again, just make sure that everything is working and your trigger is working before you take your second half of the shell and put it back on. Now just take your shell and you can set it back onto the bottom half. And now you're done, so you can reinsert all of your screws. So that's the end of my modification tutorial on the Nerf Modulus ECS-10. As always, I hope you enjoyed the video, and thanks for watching.